Good afternoon, Peter. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you on the show. A really interesting story I think we've got here, and you know, I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of it. You and I don't know each other particularly well. You know, we've met once before, and I think I reached out to you after I saw some article that you were quoted in that you, I think, yeah, it might have been a bit more than that, but I think I read something that you wrote. And based on what we do here, I thought it would be good for us to chat. And here we end up talking because I think it's an interesting story. So just to sort of frame that for anyone who's watching, do you want to just give us a very quick overview of perhaps both the sort of roles that you're playing at the moment, and then we'll sort of get into it a little bit more after that.
No, thank you, and thanks, Steve, for having me. It's I feel very humble. So I've been a partner at Herbert Smith Freehills for 16 years, and I head up the venture capital group there, and have done a lot of venture capital the last 10 years. And then in July of this year, I accepted a role at SafetyCulture to be in their legal team and to head up corporate development. And so I hold both roles at the moment. It's a little bit novel, but I'm working at each organisation on a part-time basis, and you know, juggling and trying to make it work, and kind of having the time of my life, to be honest.
I think it's awesome, and I think it's very progressive of Freehills to enable you to do both as well. I'm also guessing by your shirt that you're a safety culture day to day, because there's you're looking quite casual.
Yeah. How the standards have fallen, and it wasn't quite three-piece suit when I started in 1994, but you certainly wore a tie every day. And it's funny, truth be told, I felt more comfortable in a suit. It was almost, not so much like armor, but a little bit like, I didn't go to a particularly good school, but at least it was a school that had a uniform, and I found university quite daunting with what do you wear each day. So that, you know, wearing the suit and tie was probably pretty easy. And about a year ago, I got to the spot where I realized I wasn't wanting it all to ever be aloof, but most of my clients were tech clients, and they'd be wearing t-shirts or jeans, and I thought, oh yeah, I shouldn't be out of whack with that. So there goes the suit, and it's now a denim shirt, as you say.
Yeah, look, the same thing happened to me. I mean, you know, I wore a suit for so long, and then the realization also hit me, and I was like, none of our clients, none of the people I deal with are wearing a suit. I didn't wear a tie for many years, but and I just thought, I've got to stop doing this. I know there's a lot of recruiters out there who still like to don the suit and tie, but I do think you need to dress to your audience. I love wearing a suit now because it's so rare, and it actually, you're right. I went to a school with a uniform as well, so you kind of grew up with the tie and the thing. But I think now, because it's so rare, it kind of feels, I don't know, it feels different than it used to. So yeah, it's good. But let's talk about your journey, because I think, you know, there'll be people sitting there going, okay, so we've got a partner here at Freehills. How on earth does he end up getting a job at SafetyCulture? But if you actually go through the story, then it kind of makes a lot of sense. So maybe why don't we go back to when you started to really become involved in the startup and scale up area, which is obviously what this show's about, and sort of go on from there.
Yeah, well, thank you. I was lucky enough to have 2 years in London during the tech craze, 98, 99, 2000, and did a lot of private equity and then a lot of venture capital. And it was a really great formative experience. I mean, some organizations I worked for were doing almost a deal a week, and there was a kind of crazy frenzy. And then came back to Australia, and you had the tech meltdown. And I kind of describe it as the caravans then moved to later stage private equity, and there wasn't a lot of venture being done. Yeah. And then about 2010, GFC was still playing its way out and activity was down. I got introduced to a couple of tech guys, and I mean, I didn't really know what they did. I kind of Googled their website and still really didn't know. And I got the gig, and they raised about 60 million and for 20%. And I thought, oh, that's not bad. They're a nice client. They seem like nice guys. And at Freehills, I got told that's not who we want to work for. And I kind of thought, oh, I can do the math. That seems like a lot of money for 20%. So I think I'll ignore that advice. And it was, other people may have heard this, but it was the Atlassian founders, and so I did their first fundraise, and kind of hit it off with them, and they were, really nice guys, and they just introduced me to a heap of people. And Freehills is an amazing firm, and I think well of it. That's why I've wanted to stay. But I was fortunate in that when I started my career, I did lots of small deals, like buying tire outlets in regional Queensland for $1 million. And I always kind of enjoyed the smaller deals, you work more closely with the people involved as opposed to doing a $2 billion mega merger. So I kind of thought I'll just keep doing this early stage stuff, and thankfully Freehills sort of tolerated me, and because I had a book of other work, private equity, and then bit by bit the venture piece just got bigger and bigger. And if you follow any of the data, the weight of capital around the world is moving to earlier stage, and it's a great spot to be because more often than not, you're in the room with the majority shareholders who are the key decision makers, and you get to provide some input, which is just a heap of fun. One of the people who Scott Farquhar introduced me to was the founder of SafetyCulture, Luke Ania.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've known him for about probably 8 years, and I've done most of his capital raises, and they've done a couple of acquisitions and joint ventures, and I've done all of that. And I was talking to Luke about 2 years ago about going on sabbatical, and he said, don't go to some institution, come and work in the real world, do a sabbatical with us for a month. And I did, and it was an eye-opener and a heap of fun. And it probably just sort of gnawed away at me, and I've enjoyed the time at Freehills. I head up the venture capital group, and we've wanted to really build a group that works. And perhaps if I just say that story about the Atlassian one, where I was told originally that's not who we want to work for, when no one really understood them. About 4 years ago at Freehills, I was asked who will be the next Atlassian, and I said, well, I don't know. If I did, I'll probably go and join them, which may say something about SafetyCulture. But what I was getting is, you can't. I don't think you should pick winners. And so we've worked on building a product that means we can do much smaller raises, and that the bit I'm proud of at Freehills is they got their head around that, because it's a firm that's set up for larger transactions. And so when the way I sum it up is, when the pandemic lockdown kicked in last year, sort of maybe March 20, that weekend I closed 3 deals. One was a $60 million raise for SafetyCulture, and the others were 2 $1 million raises. Amazing company in Northern Beaches called Slow Coach. Really great founders, just enormous integrity, a heap of fun. And I'm equally as proud of those 2 smaller transactions. And so, I don't think you pick winners. I think you try to back people. And for me, it's been a heap of fun. But as well as in my own career, moving almost to a sort of strategic kind of strategy type role, and we've built a team who does most of the legwork and the great work. I thought, well, what next? And started having some chats with Luke over the Christmas break, and the opportunity to join them in corporate development was really appealing. So, when I joined, number of people in corporate development was just 1, and so it's a bit of make it up as you go along. But it's fun.
Excellent. Now, look, I think it would be really useful to have you explain a couple of things that perhaps some of the founders may or may not know, and some of the people, our audience is really made up of founders, and it's also made up of a huge amount of people who are interested in moving into this startup scale-up space, which, as you rightly said, is exploding, and there's huge amounts of capital flowing into that now. When you're doing a deal, you're brought on to facilitate the actual transaction between the founders or the current shareholders and whoever is putting money in, usually a venture capital firm, correct? So give us a quick overview of, I guess, how involved is that process? How long does a typical transaction take? So let's take it from the point that they've already got a VC that's interested. They're not actually running around town still pitching. How long is that process? How involved in that process? And anyone who's thinking about raising capital, give us a little sort of snapshot into what that might look like.
Yeah, it's the shortest deal I've done was Deputy Series A, and it's I'm only saying things that are in the public domain.
Yep.
I think there was a 30 million raise at 150. That took 32 days straight.
Okay.
And obviously that's a big check and a big valuation, but I think you're looking at between 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
What is? I always say the deal is done in the term sheet.
Mm-hmm.
What does it involve? The investors will want to do due diligence on your business and understand it. The Cliff O'Brien, who's just such an amazing founder, has got this great saying: "Make them fall in love with the business and then talk price." But I think you want to sell what you're trying to build. and be really passionate about it. And then if they get engaged and they're starting to do some work, then the venture fund or the investor will do some due diligence, and they'll want to understand what your product is, what the competitors are, how product market fit is, why they should invest in you. And as they start to get more engaged, then they tend to start to probably talk to people, I used to say, who look like me, but maybe not as scruffy. But they'll start to talk to their own in-house lawyers, and a lot of the funds have now got that. Some of the great funds, Blackbird and others, but they'll start to prepare a term sheet, and the term sheet is really just a summary of the deal. And there are really only about 3 issues that kind of matter. So the valuation. So how much money are they putting in? At what valuation, and what's the preference rates they get? So where do they sit in it's called the capital stack? And I guess what that means is if I put $1 million in today, what percentage of the company do I get? And then if the company winds up tomorrow, I get my money back first. And that tends to be how many deals are structured. So you negotiate the economics of the deal, and people may have heard about pre-money or post-money. I think the right way to look at it is, if I'm putting $1 million in, what percentage of the company do I get? So if it's $1 million on a post-money valuation of 10, then I'm getting 5% of the company. We can talk about option plans or ESOPs a little bit later on, because that factors in there. But there's the economic deal, and I tend to say I get my money back first. Then the other critical component are the governance rules. So what's the board? What do I have veto rights over? Who gets to build the company out? What information rights do I have? And a lot of that's relatively formulaic, but there's a critical point for founders, and that is to control the board so that they're the ones driving the bus. And what I sometimes say is, if an investor wants complete control, then are they really backing that management team? And so, I've bought into the vision. I like what you're doing, Steve, so I'm going to back you. Yes, I might want a board seat, but you're the one driving the bus. So governance. And then I think the final piece is sort of dealing in equity. So if you raise more money, I think I should have the right to put more money in, so preemption right to follow in. And if you're going to sell the company, I'd have a right to tag along. Let's negotiate when you can drag me and require me to sell. You probably need to give me a base level return. Those things can be kind of agreed relatively quickly. I do tell this one other story, and I think it kind of helped me get the original Atlassian gig, because when I was asked by Scott, what are the issues? I said there are only 3. One of them was slightly different from what I'd said, but what's the pricing? Where do they come in the capital stack? What are the governance rules? And then, do you get to sleep at night? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you get sued, this is the worst deal of all time. We need to make sure you're protected. You can grow the business, but you're not exposed. And I think whilst I've been able to, probably get some meetings and drum up a bit of work saying I did that deal, I've actually never felt I really worked for them. I've actually felt that I've never worked for the company. I've worked for the 2 founders. And I think one of the critical things in early stages, you develop a relationship with the founders, and then hopefully they warm to you, but you look after them. Because they're the people who are going to take it to the next level. And an example for me that's a story I really cherish is, I started working for CultureAmp when there were just 5 founders. And then a couple of months ago, we helped them close out $130 million raise at $2 billion val. And it's building that relationship where you look after the founders. So, I think the critical things to think through in a term sheet. And what I also say is the deal gets done in the term sheet. So sometimes founders will come and say, oh, hey, we've signed a term sheet. And that's a little bit harder, because you think, oh, okay, I might have to try to claw some stuff back here. But probably, I'll take a breath for a second. The final point I'd say is, I think it's important for founders to do due diligence on the investor as well. Because the road is never linear. It's never straight. It gets bumpy. And who are the people you want on that journey with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true of any person going for a job. They need to do just as much diligence on the company as well. Same sort of principle. Now, you mentioned something in there that I get asked a lot. We deal, as you know, with quite a lot of earlier stage companies that are just beginning their founding journey, and they don't have a board. When do you think is the right time, from what you've seen? And obviously, I know this isn't necessarily your field of expertise in terms of recommending boards, but when do you think is the right time to get that board? And how have you seen people do that? Because it's another question that people ask me. They say, how do I get a board? Where do I get a board from?
Yeah. And the starting point is every company needs at least one director.
Yep.
I think in an early stage, you don't want many more. And we can talk about advisory boards in a minute, but at the end of the day, investors, if they fall in love with the idea, actually also need to and do fall in love with the founders, and that sense that founder or those founders can drive a great result.
Yep.
And if a board is too big early on, I think that becomes a negative. And I at times I've seen people get excited because they say, "Hey, I've got on my board, former chairman of XYZ listed company," and I don't think that adds that much value. And
No.
It can be a negative if you feel that the board dynamic is not strong. So what the practice that started to develop was the use of advisory boards, where you would get 2 or 3 people who have expertise in a certain area to provide you with strategic input.
Yep.
But it's not an overly formulaic, regimented regime. It's more, I, as a founder, can call on you to give me input in a particular area or call on someone else. That's been more powerful because it's been a little bit more fluid. I can tell you, because I do act for some investors as well and investing into companies, it becomes a negative if you feel like there are people on the board who've got a say or may even have a blocking right, and they're not going to take the company to the next stage. So my advice would always be, don't have a big board. And even with an advisory board, if you're bringing someone on and it's someone who's got expertise in a particular area and you say, well, I want to give them equity, that equity should vest over time, provided that person has got on and delivered what they've said they were going to do. I've seen a few examples, unfortunately, it's quite sad, where people have got onto their advisory board. Some particular senior, tends to be a white Anglo-Saxon male, to be honest, but anyway, but someone who is probably 55 or 60, and they're going to add an enormous value, and they just don't. And part of that is, I know it's cliche, but everything's changing so quickly. So what someone did 20 years ago doesn't really help. You need one director. Think long and hard about who you get on. Make sure that you feel like they're going to deliver. And just because they've had a title won't of itself mean that an investor sees that as a significant positive.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I've seen that. I've seen many a founder come to me and say, I've got this advisor or a mentor or whatever it is. And, they worked in the industry, but they did it 35 years ago. And I go, well, and he goes, I don't agree with their opinion, but I don't want to necessarily. And I was like, well, if he's done it 35 years ago, what's he done recently? Or what have they, and you're right, it is usually an Anglo-Saxon man. What have they done recently? And it's often nothing. And I was like, I don't know how you can take advice that seriously from someone who's not even working sometimes and is really completely disconnected. And you're right, the world is changing so quickly, as is so evident now with the fact that you and I are doing this remotely as opposed to face-to-face. Just in the last 2 years, the world's completely turned on its head. So that's interesting. You also touched very briefly, and I don't want to go into too much because it can get really complicated, options and ESOPs. And that's usually the question that follows on after we talk about funding and after we talk about boards. Then founders start saying, I want to create an ESOP, or I don't understand what the difference is between an option and, do you have to buy options, or do and all those things. And I know option plans and ESOP plans are completely customizable and can be designed in any way that you want. But is there a sort of go-to formula that the bulk of people do?
Yeah, I think that this is much easier now, certainly for early stage companies and emerging companies. 3 years ago, the federal government reformed the employee ownership rules and made it much easier. There were great reforms. There's a slight sadness. I think they should have gone further in terms of the companies that can use them. But at the very early stage, on the ATO website, there's some open source documents. I got the gig drafting them, and so therefore they're not bad. No. But they've actually got instructions in them and how to use them. And I think that people don't need to spend a lot of money anymore to implement a basic option plan. And there's some guidance notes on how to get the tax right. I think one of the core things to remember, though, and sometimes founders haven't been told this, is that I gave the example before. If I'm going to invest $1 million into your business at a $10 million valuation, so I'm going to get 10%. And what I tend to write in the term sheet is, on a fully diluted basis, assuming an option plan of 10%. So what that means is I don't get diluted by the 10%. So you're going to bear the whole cost of that 10%.
Right.
We actually gross my stake up so that when the 10% gets issued, then I end up where I planned on. So when founders say to me, how many shares or options can I issue? I say you can issue till the end of time. There's just only over 100%. And so early on, equity is the most valuable thing. And it's really hard because often you haven't got a lot of cash. And so you're trying to manage that. But there becomes a precedent implication. So if I get a junior engineer in and give that person 2% of the company, then the head of engineering is going to get a lot more than that.
Yep.
And again, it's the founder who bears the dilutionary impact of that. So I think option plans are great. I think they should be used. I know there's a lot of companies who give them out to everyone. I think early on, there's probably merit in not being so broad, and there's certainly merit in identifying who are the team that you want with you. But as you start to grow, again, there's some good precedents out there. And what I love about this industry, and I'm sure you've experienced it, is that founders will be able to bounce stuff off other people and go, hey, how did this work for you and how did it work for you? One thing that I think you absolutely have to do with an option plan is have a vesting regime in there. And I gave the example earlier about someone on the advisory board who might say, well, I want 2% and then just doesn't deliver. If you bring me in as the head of corporate development and you're not sure whether I'll make it, then my option should vest over time. Means that if I leave in 2 months and I wasn't the right guy, I don't get anything.
Yep.
And so by vesting, people should understand that as earned. So I only earn the options when I show that I've earned my keep. And in this case, there's quite a strong market practice out of the US that's largely followed here, that if you give me 100 options, then 25% will vest at the end of year one. It's a cliff. And then the remainder over a 3-year period. And again, a founder doing that is acting completely consistent with market. And it's appropriate that the founder and his or her equity position is protected, because if a founder gives away too much equity too early on, it becomes harder to raise because an investor will say, you haven't got enough incentive now.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right, let's switch it up. Let's talk about SafetyCulture and your new part-time career that you're going into. So, head of corporate development, give the viewers out there a little bit of insight into what that actually means in a I guess it's a scale up now, isn't it? Now it's obviously a multi-unicorn in a company like SafetyCulture. What are you going in there to do?
Hopefully help with their growth trajectory, which is pretty amazing. But the company started probably 12 years ago in a garage in Townsville. I mean, it is the really romantic, beautiful, cliched story, and just the strength of Luke and Nura as a founder. And they built their kind of flagship product, the iAuditor product, which is an automated checklist that originally to help with health and safety, but now moves more towards business improvement and helping frontline workers. Company's done some amazing stuff with some of the state governments around checking for COVID compliance, and let's not go down the path that we wish everyone would have got that right. But the flagship. That was the flagship product. But the company is moving quickly towards a platform-based approach. So you may use iAuditor or one of their other products to help you with part of your job. But if you identify, hey, I've done this checklist and things that are now not in place, then actually what I will do is send a report off to someone else and create an action, and they'll get on and monitor that. So it's really the compliance function in an organization made very easy for frontline workers to use it. There's lots of other parts of the company, but your question was why have I sort of come on board? I think with the company having raised a lot of capital now and wanting to expand, we will look for strategic investments, acquisitions last year, and I worked on each of these from a Freehills perspective, but the company bought an education training business, EdApp, where it's very easy for workers to create video training content and upload that to train large parts of the workforce. So one can see the adjacency with the core SafetyCulture business there. And separately, we did a joint venture with QBE to develop an insurance platform as well. So there's a lot on. Like any emerging company, there's a need to get the team going and humming along. There's a new CFO, John Blake, who's ex-head of private capital at Goldman Sachs, New York. Tom Cooper, who's ex-Freehills, Goldman Sachs as well, has come into the corporate development role. So there's a lot of energy and incentive. Energy and enthusiasm. The things that on a day-to-day basis, as I say, to help with strategic acquisitions or potential alliances. So taking hopefully some of the skills I had as an M&A lawyer and trying to apply them a bit more broadly.
Yeah, that's good. We had the EdApp guys on a few weeks back, actually, on the show. So that's a hell of a story. I got to say, I enjoyed that episode immensely. I think we actually released it last week. It's got a lot of good feedback. But yeah, a very aligned purchase. I thought that was very good. One of the things that people have always liked about this show is the founders or yourself or whoever it is that we're interviewing, just talking about potentially either a very interesting challenge or a mistake that you learn a huge amount from. We all have both of those things many, many times in our careers. Is there anything in yours that, and it could be in any capacity, that has really stood out that you feel maybe even changed the way that you behave or a belief or how you conducted yourself or anything that had a really, really profound impact on you?
That's a kind question. I may try to answer it in two parts. I did experience when the global financial crisis hit that a lot of the people I worked for went out of business, and so you wear out shoes by walking around town, catching up with people. I probably put on 10 kilo by having a gazillion lunches, again, just trying to stay in front of people. And I played a big role at Freehills in the team engagement and team culture. And there was a manager there at the time, and I perhaps didn't get on that well with him, but he said to me, don't focus on team engagement. Like, you have one objective only, and that's to bring work in. And for about a month, I listened to that. And then I thought, that's not who I am. And there's a sense of wanting to look after the lawyers and the team and hopefully add something. And so I ignored that advice, and it was the right thing to do. And I think, to thine own self be true. And throughout that period as well, because there was less work, you'd get put on different committees or groups. So why don't we go and try and target work over here? And I think I felt that that didn't work where I wasn't fundamentally interested. And unless you're really interested in something, and I think you can kind of, if you'd wanted to, and I don't, but you can fake it for a little bit of time. But unless you're passionate about it. So the other thing I would say is that with the venture space, I find people curious and I'm interested in them, and I feel like I'm the kid in the candy shop because I get to work with some amazing founders, and it's sort of a pains to say not all of them succeed, and I find myself in a really nice way questioning what success is, because part of it is having the journey go well and working with and hanging out with really good people. But so when I was told that Atlassian's not who we want to work for, I just thought, but they're just good guys. Yeah. So let's try to make that work. And what I found curious was, like, often some of the assumptions that organizations say, you can't do this because of, if you question them, that's not often based on really strong ground. So, for me, we're one of the biggest firms in the country, and I think it's an amazing brand and that. But like, whatever, like, get over yourself and have a bit of fun. And so my criteria, and I've got it wrong quite a few times, but more often than not. But my criteria is, if you're a founder or someone who wants to see if we can help, is, are you hardworking? Do you have integrity? Do you want to build something amazing? And then I kind of think, well, how can we help? And sometimes we can't. It doesn't make sense. But for the most part, it's okay. Well, let's give you a couple of tips to try to get you to the next stage, and then maybe to the next stage. And I mentioned the slow coach guys before. I hold it really valuably because they sort of trust my opinion. They want to bounce things off me, and they just got incredible integrity. And I again learn from them. So the bit that for me was probably in my own career revolutionary was to say, I'm not going to do it has to be a deal of this size. Yeah, I'm just going to try and be curious and see what happens.
I think that's a great answer. Look, I'm very much of your thinking in the kid in the candy store. I'm the same. We work with over 200 startups now, and just the people you meet and their energy and their positivity and what they're trying to do, and they've all got these ideas that you go, oh my God, I can't believe you thought of that. And it's a fascinating sector to work in, and there's fascinating people in it. And the energy you get off them makes the journey more enjoyable. And I think you're right. I think success is probably the actual journey, because the result is very brief at the end of whatever it is that you get. If you actually get a result is a very short period of time usually. But getting to that result is the period that you want to enjoy the most, because it takes ages. So I think that's a very good way of defining success. I have not heard anyone say that on this show before. I like that. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention the pandemic. We are sitting here miles away from each other. I got to leave the house today to come here. You, unfortunately, are still at home. But I guess, how have you found it's impacted? And we'll go back to Freehills here, because obviously law firms, I'm fascinated with law firms and how they've reacted to pandemics, because law firms traditionally incredibly office-based, right? Huge amounts of knowledge transferred through being together in a room and asking questions, and osmosis almost, right? And you know, that timesheet-driven environment and all those kinds of things that you associate with law firms and beautiful offices. That's all sort of been taken away to some degree. It's obviously still there, but it's not the same. How have you as a firm, I guess, and you personally adapted to that? It's not such a big change for a company like SafetyCulture, although we will touch on that. But we'll talk about Freehills first.
What probably helped was that we were used to doing deals via, a smaller amount, but used to doing transactions and deals and negotiations via technology, because you do cross-border deals.
Yep.
So it wasn't such a quantum leap. I think the pandemic actually, unfortunately, is a function almost of where you are in life. I mean, if you're 26-year-old, you know, really great young lawyer, accountant, sharing with 4 other people in, you know, flat in Paddington, then there is no office space. There's no kitchen. I mean, like you're in your bedroom, and that's tougher than. I turned, say it really softly, 50 last year. So, but it's just AstraZeneca for me. But you know, we've got a house that we were lucky enough to renovate, and you know, the kids can be somewhere else and that. So, I think one's experience of that is sort of a function of the environment. But from an organization perspective, I'm just really proud, and this is everyone across the industry. There's lots of amazing law firms, but there's just a sense of like, we're kind of all in this together, so let's try to make it work. And, you know, for the most part, people were sort of respectful that, and I actually think in lockdown number 2, unfortunately, we've got to do lockdown number 2, but people are more aware of, hey, you just need a day off now. Or
Yep.
like you spent too long in front of the screen. And this happened with my children as well through school education, and the schools have got this time around, got better at it. But whilst we can do interviews like this, we can do negotiations, the break between work and home ended. And I think we all struggled with, well, when does the day stop?
Yeah.
And it's something different. Like, you would have worked at home many, many times like I did before the pandemic. But there was something about leaving one spot and having a bit of downtime as opposed to sort of being on all the time. I think what surprised all of us was how good the technology is. If we were to have had this pandemic 15 years ago, I suspect we wouldn't have been able to shut down. I think economically people would have just...
Can you imagine what would have happened? Would the economy would have either stopped, or you're right, we wouldn't have been able to shut down. I'd not really sort of reflected on that, but you're quite correct. You know, without broadband even, it would have just, gosh, frightening.
Yeah, but look, I think that you spoke about it before, learning by osmosis. It's an interesting debate. Things will obviously change, and when you get through something significant like this, history would say that there's changes that then kick into place. But I think what the pandemic taught a whole generation, me included, is that it's quite easy to work from home. And like, whilst it's easy to, the hopeless optimist in me will often go to some of the positives. I mean, my sort of, I'm just going to chill out at 5:30 last year wasn't to go down and get a coffee at the bottom of 161 Castlereagh Street in Sydney. It was to go to the park and kick a football with my son. And so I sort of cherish that bit now. And I got in the habit of having dinner at home every single night, which I didn't beforehand. So rituals kind of changed. However, I think everyone wants to belong. And so one of the problems with working from home was some of those connections were harder. And that learning by osmosis is absolutely something we've missed out on. the young lawyers at all the firms and young accountants are just amazing, and they're very talented, and they should have the ability to sit in someone who's done the job for 20 years. Like, you're not particularly great just because you're a partner. It just means you've been there long enough to learn some stuff. But to have people to sit in your office and pick things up, it's such a rich way of learning, and that bit's been lost at the moment. And it just doesn't translate as well with people on calls. So I'm not in the camp that the office is dead. I think office space will reduce a bit. I think firms will get the capacity to have less property space. I'll have the workforce working a bit from home and a bit in the office, but I think people will go back when they can, to be part of a team again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, and I think then if you sort of reflect that into an organisation like SafetyCulture, so they probably worked from home a lot more than a lot of other industries did always, but they also had, as we've talked about, they had cool offices. They had a real sense of culture. They had all sorts of different things going on to really build a sense of, like you mentioned earlier, belonging. So how does a company like that put a lot of value on that is also at the same time scaling at such an enormous rate, keep and maintain that culture and then onboard new people into a culture without that sort of central hub? I mean, I know you've only been there a couple of weeks, but you've worked there before and you've obviously worked very closely with them. What are your thoughts on that? Because their challenges are quite different.
They are. I think it begins with a commitment. Like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to be respectful of the individual? And if you have a set of values or cultures, are you actually going to really stick to them? And I've been incredibly impressed by SafetyCulture. Whilst I've onboarded, it was started July, but from home, and I've not been into the office. It's only been the last week or so that I've missed it. I felt like a little bit flat, and I can explain why in a second. But the IT department made it incredibly easy to get onto the platform. There were regular checkups. Mick there is just a legend. The people and culture leader, Anna Wengren, is amazing. And there's little things like everyone in the organisation got sent cupcakes about 2 weeks ago, a whole pack of 4 cupcakes. There were 5 in my family, so everyone else ate them before I got to them. But it was just such a lovely, lovely thing to do. And it's that thing. I know you would get this in your career. It shouldn't take a lot just to acknowledge someone. And I think what the leadership at SafetyCulture have done well, and why I'd like to remain part of it and do a good job, is but just that regularly checking in at, hey, you're going okay, and you're doing a good job, and actually, okay, here's some stuff to work on. Like, being committed to engaging with the individual. So I've reflected on this a lot in my career. I think it's hard, and it's equally not. I think you actually make a strong commitment to engage and respect with the individual. And if the cards get thrown up, then you go, okay, well, this is what we're going to play with. So, like, I think on Friday night we've got, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire SafetyCulture kind of quiz, and it's kind of crazy fun and just a sense of, let's try to stay connected. Now, does everyone in the organisation dial into that? Absolutely not. Are there some people who working from home works better than others? Yeah, completely. But I think we've got some quite strong feedback that for the most part people want to be back in the office, because it's that ability to just walk to someone's desk and either say, hey, I got this problem, or I always tell this very quick story about at Freehills, one of my best friends, the best lawyer I've ever met, the great Stephen Dobbs. I would always get the ability to bounce things off him, but what kept us sane was that at least once a week one of us would go into the other's office and say a version of, in The Great Escape, if Steve McQueen just does this, I think he'll get away. And it's that kind of camaraderie and how you look out for each other. Just let's let the pressure come off a bit by being completely goofy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I know I'm missing the office, probably more so in the last few weeks as well. I don't want to be in the office 5 days a week, and we never were, but I do miss. We always did 2 to 3 days, and I miss that, and I think most people do. I don't think the office is dead either. I tend to agree with you. I think it'll just get used less, and they'll probably be a little bit smaller. But I think I think if anything, it's probably made people realise that they do need it. I'm talking about the second lockdown there. I think there was a lot of talk after the first one that we don't need it anymore. We're never going to go back to it. And then the second one's made people realise, actually, no, we do need it. So if there is a third one, which I don't think there will be, who knows what might come out of that. All right. Well, look, last question. I think you've had some incredible experiences. You met some incredible founders. You would have dealt with goodness knows how many founders. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to the founders that are watching this, and maybe it's something that you've been asked the most out of all of the deals that you've done, and it doesn't have to be M&A related, it could be about anything. But if there's one piece of advice you could give to budding founders right now who are watching this, what would that be? That's a surprise question as well. I never told you I was going to ask that one, so you've had no chance to think about that.
I'm going to really I'm going to really apologize and just give two because they're really powerful for me. So
okay.
the first is, and I do tell this story a few times. It really stuck with me. Freehills actually is an amazing global business. So I've done some incredible deals, and I've negotiated against the Chinese government. I've worked on Combank buying Bank West, which was done in 3 days straight. And yet, worked for private equity, investment banks, listed corporates. I was in a meeting once where the tax advisor said, "This is what the section of the Act says." And the client turned around and said, "No, I read that section last night. I don't think that's correct." And that was Scott Farquhar. That's the only time in my career have I seen anyone do that. Now, he didn't read the entire Tax Act, but he read the section that was relevant to Atlassian for that meeting. His attention to detail and discipline was amazing. And Mike Cannon-Brookes is exactly the same inkling. And so, undoubtedly there was an element of luck to what they did, but there was a truckload of hard work, I had to swear then, but they were incredibly disciplined and they wanted to understand it. And so I haven't had many, but when I hear a founder go, "Oh, no, I'm not really interested in that," I kind of think, but it's your business. Why wouldn't you be? Doesn't mean you need to be the expert on every bit, but understand it enough that you can be in the conversation. That it really stuck with me, and I try to apply that to myself. But the final thing is there are two amazing founders with businesses that are at different stages. Tim Carroll out of Melbourne with Buckitdream, which is just the most decent man, and the journey with him and the learnings were just spectacular. And then Dave Anderson at Big Red Group in Sydney. But each of them had something more than just wanting to make money. And so David was talking about sustainability and the environment and reconciliation and bringing others up long before people started saying ESG is the thing and we need to do it to impress some investors. It was a core passion for him, and he wanted to build a business with that embedded in it. That's something you get passionate about. That's amazing. And then Tim Carroll got, "Let me build a team and let me include everyone." And again, it's that bright line, not just by saying it. Let me tell a story that other people want to buy into. And I kind of think you and I have spoken about it before. We both use the analogy kid in the candy shop, but we've got such a great opportunity. Really throw yourself in, and probably back to my comment a little bit earlier, work on what really works for you as a founder, and then I think everyone's got a particular strength. Find a way to really make that show. And look, there's some stuff that I'd be rubbish at. So you get some people who are kind of good who can help you with that. But again, to thine own self be true. And if people don't like that, then they're not the right people.
Yep. That's a good answer. I love that. That's great. Peter, what a fascinating chat, and what a unusual and interesting angle and insight you've given to the audience, which we've never had before. I've loved it. I think it's great. I'm really glad we got you on. I know there's a lot of stuff in there that other people won't have thought about or heard before. So that's the purpose of this platform, right? Is to get that information out there. So fantastic. Look, I wish you the absolute best of times at SafetyCulture. Now you're getting in there, and I hope you get back in that office soon. I heard a rumor that we're going to be able to get our hair cut, which is very important for me soon if we get double vaccinated, which I am. So there's a chance there. But look, I wish you the best of luck with where you're going in your career now. I think it's awesome that you're doing both. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your insights.
Well, look, thank you for having me. It was a heap of fun. I apologize, I babble on a little bit too much, but maybe after I've had the haircut, we'll grab a pint and discuss war stories then. But look, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks, mate.
Cheers. Bye-bye.